It's that time again.
Yes, it is.
And look who joined us this week.
Look who's back from the dead, man. Woo.
I got to be honest with you. In the zombie apocalypse, what's your favorite weapon? Like, I need to know that right off the top of my head.
I think a crossbow. I think I'm gonna need that.
Oh, you're a Daryl fan, are you? You're a
Yeah,
Daryl fan.
absolutely. That'd be my go-to, man.
um, Joking aside, for those of you who may or may not know who we are and what this is, welcome to Sell Like a CPCU. This is a production of the Agents and Brokers Interest Group from the CPCU Society. We are here to share tips, tricks, best practices, hacks, selling techniques, anything that we can in order to help insurance professionals do their job better. So, as a reminder, we shoot this show live, so please like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet as usual, and we take live comments and questions a la Tony Kanyes getting on us for being 5 minutes late. Tony, we're dealing with a national or at least a regional emergency here. I think Precious at least deserves a little slack.
Hey, and I figured, Tony, that we'd be celebrating, man, since our mugs are on the banner for the upcoming conference.
That is very true. Congratulations. You're going to be internet famous, I believe.
Woohoo! That and a bucket of Coke.
yeah. That and 35 cents, and you could make a pay phone call if there were any pay phones left.
Exactly.
So this week, fantastic to have you back. I was just kind of treading water as quickly as I could for a couple of weeks there. But
an amazing job holding down our slot here, bringing the content. So no, it's good.
I try.
Yes.
I try. So this week we are talking about something that is very near and dear and affecting a lot of people as we speak, and it being just the nature of property valuation. Okay, both before anything bad happens, and then especially after the bad happens. So recently, I don't want to necessarily make you dive into the headaches and things like that you're going through. But
I'm here to live out loud. This is how this works. I'm getting quite comfortable with it now.
I love the authenticity. So let me ask you one question. Does the insurance industry do valuation of property after a loss well? And I'm just going to turn off my camera and my mic, and you can go.
So here is what I will say in terms of valuation. The first thing is that we tend to underestimate by far what it really takes to take care of business when the time comes. There's so many tools that most of our policies are equipped with, an inflation guard, that automatically adjusts up a certain number of, percentages, renewal over renewal. But I would argue that alone is probably not sufficient versus a full out revaluation. And so you have two competing priorities that normally happen when it comes to valuation. And it's just like anything else, it's trying to really pinpoint what a true value of something is, and then obviously the cost, of insuring it for that much. So I will say, full transparency and admission here, that 15 plus years in the PNC side of insurance, and I was caught underinsured, as far as my personal household is concerned, because we don't really think about, case in point, walking through a scenario, especially on the personal line side. You have a prospect, a couple, a family, and they're trying to close on a house. right?
Yep.
And so conversation number one comes up, which is let's discuss the characteristics. Let's walk through the whole COPE conversation, right?
Yep. Yep.
What's the construction, the occupancy, the protection, the exposures, and let's go through all of those things. And we come up with a dollar amount. And normally that's going to be a snapshot of the property as is at the time of buying, at the time you're closing on the house. And insurance isn't one of those things that comes top of mind every time you upgrade from linoleum, every time you swap out and you go from the window dressings that came with the property, and now you have actual drapes, or you know every Christmas that rolls around and the TVs get bigger, the closets get fuller.
Yep.
All of these life events that happen, insurance is not even on the radar of things that we need to be, looking at and reevaluating. And then lo and behold, before you know it, as most households improve and, things change over the course of time, the time of the loss is a completely different snapshot than the time of binding,
Right. Yeah.
And so, the valuation happens on both ends, because we've all been there, especially on the personal line side, where, you're quoting home and auto, right? You run the tools, it gives you a dollar amount. And depending on what part of the country you're in or what sort of property you're dealing with, oftentimes the insured is going to scoff, right? Oh my gosh, that's way rich. I'm only buying the house for a fraction of that. Why would I insure it for this dollar amount, and then you have the flip side of it where they're buying it for so much more, and the request is always, oh, I need to bump that up, because both of those are looking at the insurance product very transactionally. As far as this being a necessary evil, a requirement for the loan, not thinking about what is the value that I actually derive from this product. On the flip side, post-loss, when these things happen, the question is always, especially when you're talking about policies that have, some sort of blanket coverage, right? Because depending on your buying habits, for example, if you purchase from a specific big box store and you have some sort of loyalty account, and you may be able to go back and pull, a purchase history, then that may be able to help you support, these are the things that I had that I never have been asked to validate and to prove, but this is just something to kind of show you that, the type of thing that I have is indeed, at this caliber. So there's so many moving pieces, and right smack dab in the middle of all of this is definitely the agent, because we're the ones that are tasked with breaking things down into, explaining the why behind the what. Because when we get into all of the ins and outs, especially when it comes to, again, the valuation of structures, whether it be, a home or, a building or whatever the case is, we have to be able to explain to them the reason we need this level of detail, and we can't simply rely on, just the flat dollar amount, is because the availability of resources, especially in the middle of a catastrophe.
Right.
When labor is scarce, when materials are scarce, then when your builder built your home, chances are, especially if it was a planned community or something like that, they were able to leverage bulk, right? Because they bought lumber, by the yard, and they had, crews that just went from lot to lot to lot. And so when you purchased it, you weren't purchasing it under the conditions that happen after a tornado or hurricane, or even in this case in Texas, where a weather event, freezing weather became a cat.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's one of those, things that is very meticulous, is very subjective, but it's important because at the end of the day, the insured, the prospect, whoever it is who's going to be, purchasing the product, has to reach a place of agreement. They have to say, this number is fair. I understand how we get to this number. I understand that the number that I'm insisting on is artificially low. and I'm willing to basically self-insure or retain the risk for whatever it is that I'm not transferring, right?
Right, right.
Or, but again, there has to be a thorough education and explanation so that consumers can make better decisions.
Yeah, yeah. What's crazy is like all of that just makes me think about the disconnect people truly have with the value of property, like the actual ground, right? Like that something's on. So what's crazy is when you're buying like a house or something like that. Truthfully, at the end of the day, what you're really buying is that plot of land. Like
Real
that's what
estate.
you're buying, right?
Absolutely.
And then the actual value of replacing what's on top of that is a completely different thing. Like what anyone who's kind of like worked in commercial property and casualty gets this, because there are all these businesses a couple of years ago, actually I'm dating myself, maybe 15, 20 years ago now, where they went through this process where they sold their plots of land and the buildings that were on it, and then leased it back from the managing company or the holding company that they sold it to. And everyone was like, well, why in the world would you do that? And you were essentially alleviating yourself of the fixed costs of that piece of property. And that gets baked in over time. So like, for instance, like you talked about kind of the price escalation, the inflation of bigger TVs and changing fixtures and stuff like that. There's also the other end of it where if you're not maintaining the house, you don't have a full appreciation of the value of that actual structure, right? And so as it goes down in terms of the upkeep and whatnot, all of that money is money that has to continue to get poured into that structure in order to keep it up. And ultimately, at the end of the day, all of that stuff kind of coalesces into whatever this final value is that we're trying to put onto the insurance policy. So it's like it's crazy amorphous, like to try and think of it that way. What would you say is is there a golden way to explain it to people? Because I can tell you from firsthand experience, like they said, I got a quote for X number of dollars. Like, what's your quote? And that's one of the reasons why I choose not to sell personal lines, is because I find it much easier to have that kind of substantive conversation with a commercial client than with a personal homeowner. What's the special sauce? Like, how do you cut through that and write a policy for twice as much on the building limit?
I really think, and as I teach the classes, as I talk to customers, the way that I've always approached the property portion of the conversation is really kind of explaining first of all, the evolution of construction. Right. So when we understand that as technology, as we know better, we tend to do better. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I explained, for example, let's go back to, the 50s and 60s and early 70s, that lead is a very effective way of deeply depositing pigment. Agreed? Yep. Right.
Yep.
So that's what we used it, right? Because colors pop, right? And so, fast forward, medicine shows lead is also very dangerous.
But it's so pretty.
It's so pretty. It's a heavy metal. It tends to affect learning and all these other undesirable effects. Mm-hmm. And so when you buy a house, I don't know what the exact year is, but there's like a threshold. It's like 70 something, like mid 70s, where they tell you that if your house was built prior to this number, that it would really be to your benefit to have a lead test done.
Right.
Because when all of these houses, all of this construction that predated that magical year, the majority of homeowners just slapped a coat of paint on it to seal in whatever was behind there. And so that's why when they do these lead tests, they do a chip test where they actually do a core sample of the paint. So they're not just doing a superficial sample to see what is the outward facing layer, but they're trying to figure out, was there any paint that goes deeper into that? Because paint flakes and chips and becomes airborne and gets on floors and gets picked up by kids and all these things, right?
Yep.
And so there are lead abatement companies. There's mitigation things that you can do if you're aware of the presence of lead, where you can, again, just make your home safer.
Right.
I tell people, especially new agents and new adjusters, that once there's a building code, as code changes, they don't tear down everything that predated the code.
Yeah.
Normally, you're only forced to bring it up to code when you're making a substantial repair, addition, when something triggers it, right?
Yeah.
And so, there was the case with, was it the Chinese drywall? Where it was really inexpensive to manufacture. It was put into a lot of properties, but then it was discovered that it was emitting gases. It was causing the pipes to erode, quicker than normal. And so it was deemed to be, they discontinued use. Does that mean they tore down everything where it existed? Absolutely not.
Nope.
I think one of the things that I really enjoyed when I did more of the personal lines on a regular basis was some of the discoveries that came back when people had home inspections done.
Mm-hmm.
Because I blame it on the emergence of all the DIY TV and things that are out there. We have all the weekend warriors with the Lowe's line of credit and say, hey, you know what, today, honey, you get the kitchen of your dreams, right? And so they've got a sledgehammer, they've got a plan, they don't understand load-bearing walls, they're just cutting into stuff and they're making it all pretty, and they're getting really creative and wiring things, and they live in that house, and by just pure grace and mercy, they don't kill themselves in this process. Now it's time to sell it to somebody else.
Yeah.
And again, as a consumer, if you're looking at the inspection as just a necessary evil to check a box so that FHA will go ahead and sign off on the loan, and you're not taking this opportunity to understand what you're getting into, I've seen pictures that have come back where there have been secret rooms in houses and, stuff that has just been patched. And, I've spoke with home inspectors, and they'll tell you little telltale signs like, why is that one wall freshly painted?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why is that table butted up against that one area, right? Like, what are the things that they're hoping in a quick walkthrough that is just going to completely go over your head? And then after it closes, you're going to realize what you've gotten into, right? So, going back to that conversation about codes, inspections, and that as the years go by and, the way that houses are built, there's two schools of thought, right? I hear people all the time say, oh, they just don't build houses like they used to.
I'm glad they don't.
So, it again, having that mindset. And so, when I talk to people who are going into insurance, especially those who are going into property claims, I'm not saying that you have to have a general contractor license, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that it would be really beneficial to have a little bit of an understanding of the trades so that these things make sense, so that when you see these numbers and these prices or the processes that are involved with doing certain things, that it's not completely foreign. I will definitely say that, when I worked for a specific carrier, I won't drop names, that we had a very thorough learning process from the property claim perspective. We had done a scavenger hunt. We went to a big box store, and they kind of gave us a list of things like, okay, I want you to find high-end, mid-grade, and low-end, like crown molding or, whatever the case was, and price it, right? And so some of the stuff shocked you. You're like, really? For this piece of wood? That's what it costs? But then when you kind of, again, like you said, have that appreciation for all of these different elements and not just the overall package price. Back to the TV shows, I love watching the shows where they come in and they make an improvement and they'll say, oh, we had a $20,000 budget, that increased the value overall by $50,000, because, what is it, the saying, like kitchens and bathrooms, or where people, pay attention to quality. So where I'm getting at with all of this is when we take the conversation away from the insurance buying transaction, and we talk a little bit just about property in general, and we explain that with new technology, with new styles of the things that are more commonplace here in Texas. And I love teaching the homeowners classes here in Texas because everything's bigger in Texas. We are home of the McMansion. We have the square footage that everyone's envious of. People who are relocating to this part of the country from other parts of the country, they like almost every new home that's built today is 2,500 square feet or more, right? And so it's not necessarily that these are opulent and that these are high-end homes. It's just larger because that's the Texas style. We love the appearance of brick. And so a lot of the property down here is brick veneer because you have all of the aesthetics, all of the curb appeal of brick. But the reality of it is, if it was true masonry, it would be so dreadfully hot. And heat is the concern in this part of the country. Whereas you get up, in the Northeast where it actually snows and you do want that, insulation, so you have properties that are still made with, concrete and real masonry. So having an appreciation of where you are in the country and what is the threat, down in Florida and the coast, the threat is wind. So you're going to have properties that are built, that you're going to have all these wind mitigation credits available to have hip roofs and things like that. Because when people understand how wind shear works, they can appreciate that's why that's a priority. You get into the heavy snowfall part of the country and watershed and snowshed is going to be the bigger priority. Not so much wind because, you don't really have hurricanes and things like that. And, not in that frequency. We had Superstorm Sandy, so I won't ever say never. But it's all about the priority. So when I talk to people and I explain to them that your house built in this year, which is also why it's really important to understand, that question that comes up about upgrades and improvements. If you are not approaching this conversation in a way that you are educating customers and explaining to them why this matters, then you're not giving them the opportunity to really do a deeper dive and get factual answers because they feel like telling the truth is punitive.
Yes.
So when you explain to someone, let's think back to 1950s and 60s. How many large screen TVs do you think were in a home? How many computers, how many appliances, how many things so this is why those homes back then, there were certain rooms in the house where it was understood that the electricity demand was going to be higher, the kitchen, right? Because you're going to have an oven, anything that heats quickly or cools quickly. Pulls like a lot of electricity, which is why they have the big plugs, not the small plugs, right? So breaking it down in little pieces like that, I'm like, okay, so if you think about the house in the 50s and the family that occupied that house and the types of things that were in that home, how does that relate to the house how you plan to use the same home?
Right.
Well, okay, so now that we agreed that, now the big thing is that, you have the outlets that already have the USB things in there, so you don't have to take your little brick with you every time you change rooms. I look for that now, like in hotels. What do you mean the lamp doesn't have a plug? Like it's supposed to be there for me already. So explaining to the customers, we need to understand when the wiring was done. Because, if you have houses that were built within this year, knob and tube was still a thing. When you explain to them, the whole, again, even with the way circuits break, back to the inspection, I've seen inspections come back and they were like, oh, the box was rigged where they had a little thing that propped it up and someone was like, oh, it's tired of the fuse. You were tired of the safety protocol?
Yeah. I was tired of this thing stopping my house from burning down.
I used to always hate, what is it, that little reset button whenever I'd use the blow dryer, and then you're like, oh man, I'd have the hair, the curling iron and the blow dryer hooked up, got no girl problems.
You're like, I gotta press this thing 15 times in order to get my hair dry. What the heck?
Why does it keep honking out? Oh, I don't know, fires, might have something to do with it. So yeah, using this opportunity to really have these conversations and say, I'm not trying to oversell you. My purpose isn't to drive the value up where that dollar amount is never going to be realized, right? Because I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's really what people's concern. Why would I insure it for that amount if the truth is the likelihood of me having a total loss or even a loss that reaches those limits, like I'll never get there.
Right.
And also making sure that our customers understand the co-insurance
Mm-hmm.
and the penalties of intentionally underinsuring, and when you lose replacement cost versus actual cash value, because
Yeah.
that's the thing too, that
Yep.
if you are just dead set on insuring it for this amount, this isn't going to bode well
Mm-hmm.
when you
Yeah.
have loss.
Well, you know what's crazy is regardless of whether it's property insurance or if it's auto or even on the commercial side, if it's D&O and they're asking for revenues or equity shares and stuff like that. Like people always think they're going to get one over on the insurance company. You're like, you realize like they do this for a
A
living, right? Like that's
living.
what they, right? And so it's never more apparent than when someone like tells you like, nope, I've never had a moving violation in my life, and then it's like Maury Povich, and it's like, oh, survey shows, nope, you're a gigantic liar, right? Like it's no, your license is suspended and you've had 3 DUIs. Like, come on, like we were gonna find it. Like, why even? It's the same thing with property insurance. It's like they think that, and like you said, the thought process on their end is it's punitive because if I divulge too much, the coverage amount goes up, the price goes up, and now that's more money out of my pocket. But at the end of the day, the one thing I find myself having a conversation with prospects more often than not is like, look, if you're giving me the right information, then you have nothing to worry about. If you're not, they're going to find it. Like it's not even like you might get off scot-free. Like you're not going to get off scot-free. They will find it. Like and so from that standpoint, it's if you're gonna have that conversation up front, it's better to just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and be like, look, if someone else is going to write you a policy for much less, understand that if they're not divulging to you that they're not covering it for enough, you're getting screwed. And you're not getting screwed because you're getting a cheaper price. Actually you are getting screwed because you're getting a cheaper price because you're not valuing your things appropriately so that if they, go up in fire or water damage or something like that, you're not going to get something back that's comparable,
And I agree, the commercial conversation is different, right?
Yeah.
Because the commercial
Well, there's a
conversation,
use case for a lot of the stuff.
there is. And we're also reminding them that the property, the different tiers and categories of coverage on the commercial side are more varied than they are on the personal side. So, for example, we want to know about inventory on hand. That's going to be different than computers. That's going to look different than your furniture. That's going to look different than property of others.
Right.
Because we often forget about that, especially when that's a situation where that's an ongoing exposure, and so when we're able to kind of break it down into different things that, the way that I always led those conversations was, most consumers, whether they're commercial or personal consumers, we accumulate things over time. And we tend to be a little frugal. So it may be because we got a really great clearance sale that we bulked up on this thing, Black Friday, birthdays, holidays, whatever, we reinvested, in this capital or the belongings that we have. But if something were to happen and you were going to turn the key for the very last time and walk away, how big would that check have to be to get you back to where you were with the absence of a sale, the absence of clearance, the absence of a discount? Because that's really where you need to be insuring for, unless you're okay waiting 8 months for Black Friday to come back. Most of us would need to replace our things. And not only understanding, making sure that dollar amount, but even again on the personal line side of it, because oftentimes we think about the dwelling and we think about the contents and we forget about, again, these special categories. Do you have jewelry? Do you have cash on hand? Do you have collectibles? Do you have things that are going to be subject to a sublimit and subject to a deductible? And are these things better served on a schedule of some kind? When it comes to the actual valuation, even about the the property itself. One of the things that I encourage agents, and again, this is really, regardless if you're doing personal or commercial property, is whatever system you're using, whether it's MSB or whoever else, make sure those defaults make sense for that property. Because once you plug in, square footage, your built, normally it's going to automatically ask you, it's going to say, okay, out of 3 bedrooms, we're assuming one of them's a master, the other 2 are not. We're assuming that, the kitchen is, and everyone's descriptors are different. What one system may classify as economy or builder's grade or whatever verbiage they use, you want to make sure that what's going on in that house or that property actually line up to what the category, what the descriptor says. The beautiful thing now, especially for personal lines writers, is that if you're writing a property that was recently on the market, chances are the real estate listing is still out there. And so nowadays you have so many interior pictures because people love to shop before you buy. You just don't wait for the realtor to walk you around. And so you can actually look at, are those counters stone? Are cabinets particle board? You can kind of get a feel for, what the actual property looks like. And so that way you can go back. Several of the replacement cost calculators that are on the market now let you do a deeper dive room by room, right? Because you might have one really fancy bathroom, usually like in the master bathroom. Where you have the separate, the tub versus the shower and all that sort of stuff. And then you might have that Jack and Jill one where the kids use that probably, looks like a dorm,
the little hole in the wall bathroom. Yes. Yep.
Wall, the peel and stick mirror, that kind of thing. And so if you take the time to actually do a walkthrough, what you should be doing during this process is not only getting a more precise and accurate estimate, but you're also building rapport, and you should be taking this time to educate the customer. The reason I'm going so granularly through this property is we want to make sure that you're not going to have to sacrifice and cut corners if you have a loss. Because it looks like, with home buyers, because just like business owners, I love to ask them like what their process was when they bought the house. How many properties did you look at? What was the gem? What was the thing that made you say, this is the one, right? And they always have that one feature of the house they brag on. Oh man, the wraparound porch was gorgeous. The neighborhood, the proximity to whatever it is. And so to explain to them, the reason we want to get this right is because if there's a loss, we want you to be able to come back to this property, preferably, and rebuild it to the same specifications that you fell in love with. And you can't do that by assumptions and defaults.
Yes. Yeah. No, most definitely. That is a good point. If you can bring it back to maybe the sentimentality of it, because I definitely feel like people, they're more inclined to value something either appropriately or even overvalue it if they're sentimental about it. And so if you can definitely bring it into that realm, I think it's maybe a little bit of an easier conversation, at least on the personal line side. The other thing I was thinking about when you hit me with this topic was just kind of the techie kind of solutions that are out there, right? So I was just doing some quick searches and stuff like that, and there's actually a number of home inventorying apps that are out there. And so again, full disclosure or full disclaimer, we don't advocate for any of these products. We don't get any kind of marketing dollars or anything like that associated with it. So you have to evaluate it on your own. But if you go look, there's a bunch of them actually out there. One of the ones that looks the most interesting, I haven't used it yet, and I really should probably do this, is it's called Blue Plum. Blue Plum Home Inventory is an app that's out there, and that's an Apple one. So if you're an Apple user, it's available to you. There's a couple of them that are Android specific. So there's one called Smart Inventory System. And then let's see, what's the other one? Magic Home Inventory. And each one of them has different different pros and cons, right? Like, so some of them can actually take, like, say, a UPC code on the
Yes.
back of something and actually book it into the system. Other ones you have to go and do like a drop down search, and then if it doesn't show up in their inventory of products, then you have to obviously manually add it and fill in the data fields. But even something as simple as not even taking like a itemized inventory of your stuff, but I used to advocate, and I had a number of clients a number of years ago that would go through and they would just do a video walkthrough of their house like once a year. And that's all they would do. They would just shoot a video that, in each room, they would just go ahead and pan the room really slowly. If there were any high value items in the house, in that room, maybe you'd get a close up of it, or if there was like on the back of the TV, like there's the info panel or whatever, or the back on a monitor, they would take a shot of that. And that was really helpful in a number of cases, because even if you can't match something up one to one, at least you know what kind of ballpark you're in, right? Like, look, if I do it, I'm OCD enough where like I'll want like the spreadsheet to like spit out at the other end. But even that is something that's better than nothing, right? Like, at least you have some kind of idea of what the snapshot of your house looked like, when everything was put together and still maintained and everything like that,
And the concept of like, kind, and quality.
Yes.
Because this is something that, when I was in personal lines, property claims came up quite frequently when we were settling these losses. And so, I'll pick on computers, for example. Planned obsolescence is real. We need to understand that the way that manufacturers make money is by building brand loyalty so that you keep coming back and buying the new thing. The iPhone is a perfect example for that. Right? So what happens with, even again, picking on Apple here, is as they continue to spit out the next iteration, they kind of start withdrawing support from the older things. I laugh every time we drive down Main Street, Anytown, USA, and you see like a TV VCR repair shop. I'm like, can they still repair TVs? Because TVs aren't really meant to be taken apart and repaired anymore. Same thing with like the vacuum cleaner places. I'm like, I don't know if anyone's still buying the Kirby that you have for like 30 years,
Yeah.
And so, as you think about that, like, again, going back to the computer scenario with laptops, back in the day, it was really based on, what was the brand and like the screen size, right? And
Yep.
so now, if you were to, whatever laptop you're using today, if it's more than 2 years old, they probably don't even sell that exact thing anymore, because the speeds are different, the storage is different, the refresh rate is different. There's all of these different things. And whereas you would think that technology changing is a good thing, technology is also getting cheaper. And so I'd have that conversation all the time that, I spent $2,000 on that laptop. Well, with the specs of that specific laptop, if I could go back and match screen size, RAM speed, capacity for storage and everything else, that $2,000 laptop probably sells for $700 right now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So when people, what really just kind of makes it, I think, just kind of, that burn and, the salt in the wound, is if they finance that computer.
Yeah.
And so now they're like, I still owe $2,000 on my credit card. What do you mean you're giving me $750 for it? And it's like, well, we are insuring the property, not the cost of it.
Right.
And so TVs, laptops, anything technology, the lifespan on it is short. But then you also have to understand what would be the functional equivalent today. If your DVD player was stolen, you may or may not even be in the market for another DVD player, right?
Yeah.
And so, it may be a Roku streamer now, or it may be a Blu-ray, whatever device of your choice. Like, kind, and quality means, is this an acceptable substitute
Right.
based on today's, standards. And that's one of those things that I explain to folks when you're talking about run-of-the-mill things.
Mm-hmm.
That may be fine if you have something that's specialized. So let's say, this whole, live cast Life is Your Life. I think Tony did he did his My Favorite Things episode here just recently.
Yep.
And I kind of felt like the only thing I was missing, Tony, if you're still listening, was I needed that Oprah moment where I could just reach under my seat and it's like, and I got one for you right now. But, hey.
You get a VR headset. You get a VR headset.
So, the specialized stuff, if you're a commercial, whomever, and you have a particular vendor that you have to use because your stuff has to be ordered and it's not retail, those are items that I would argue belong on a schedule. That should be on some sort of floater, that should be on an inland marine. And especially the commercial folks, we need to make sure that we're explaining to people that, what's covered on premise, off premise. If you have stuff that lives in the car, if you have stuff that's always on the road, then you need to have that be more detailed. I would argue in that case, you do need, like you said, serial numbers and the specifics on what it is so that you can explain why the, big box store version is not one kind of quality to what you had.
Yeah. Tony's saying that he's going to need a sugar daddy or sugar mama in order to have that Oprah moment.
Hey, I was with you. I had a list. I was taking notes, and he was even kind enough to say, "Hey, look, insurance nerds exit left, like hardcore techies, stay on." And I was like, "Oh, I've got to have that." And I was like, "Oh, wait, it's not Christmas yet." And specialized stuff, guys. You can't just be relying on whatever blanket limits exist. And that's another point too, especially right now where we're still in this post-COVID era. Well, not post-COVID, that's wishful thinking. I'm in Texas. I'll table that. People are doing business from their homes, whether for somebody else or for your own business. You really need to understand where there are limitations and where that separates, right? Because if you have a computer that you use for leisure, but you also use for business at the time of a loss, how is that going to be classified? Bill Wilson, he does his amazing, presentation when he talks about like riding mowers, right?
That's the best.
Yes.
It's so good.
I'm not going to go too deep into his pitch, but the point is you need to understand not just how much coverage you have, but you also need to be able to walk out scenarios and let people understand if a loss occurred right now, this is how it would all hash out.
Yes. Yeah. The dynamic of having specialized stuff is also interesting to me from the standpoint of just the human activity and kind of thing. So like tons of people have very unique like hobbies and stuff. And so if you have a unique hobby and there's a piece of equipment or a piece of technology or something else that goes along with that, again, that's another situation where not everyone is going to have something like that. And so it's probably not contemplated as like a standard thing that is covered. Now, will it have some coverage? Maybe, but again, it might be sublimited or, that one item that you have, if it's a sound mixing board or like, I'm just thinking of like, Rick Serrato from the New Jersey chapter, like Rick's got DJ equipment and stuff like that. Like if you have a side hustle or if you have like a hobby or something that has specialized stuff that comes with it, you at least have to ask the question, right? Like one of the worst, not one of the worst, but one of the most odd like warehouse claims I ever heard of was a guy who had the reason why I said sound mixing board, he had a sound mixing board that got discontinued. Okay, and so certain types of technology that gets discontinued, it's like outmoded. It's like not worth as much anymore. There's newer stuff that's better. Well, there are some niches within the technology space where the outmoded stuff is actually more desirable than the current stuff because of one reason or another. Like this was like a specialized sound mixing board that you just can't get anywhere. Like maybe the person who made it was like a savant and they passed away, so like it was like one of only a handful that were made or something like that. It was basically a $400,000 sound mixing board, and it was stored on consignment at a warehouse,
Mhm.
and the warehouse ended up moving locations, and they did not have a good inventorying system.
Mhm.
And so that $400,000 sound mixing board, somewhere in the process of being stored in two locations and moved between those two locations, wasn't there anymore. It just disappeared, right?
Mhm.
And so from that standpoint, that individual didn't have personal insurance. He
Mhm.
was relying on the insurance coverage through the bailment with the
Yes.
company. And now the company had to reach some kind of negotiated price with him because, again, it's not like you can just go to like Costco and be like, how much is a standard sound mixing board? It wasn't even comparable, right? And so that's one of those things where, like, if you have something that's super specialized, do not assume. Don't assume for a second that it's covered to the full amount, or that you're even going to be able to get something back that's comparable to it. Just kind of word to the wise. But yeah, so I think those are all valid points. I'm
I
just trying
think
to think
also,
after the loss. After the loss, is there something that you can do to help make sure that you're not getting shortchanged?
I think that when it comes to being able to, articulate and the duties after a loss,
Hmm.
that's something that is really important. That as agents, when we're discussing coverage with our insureds, that they understand that the insurance policy is a contract, that there are duties on both ends, right? So the insurer, the company, that's offering coverage in exchange for timely payment of premium, are going to, settle a loss. The
Right.
insured, the policyholder, has to cooperate with the investigation. They have to report it timely. They have responsibility to mitigate that loss and to minimize damage. If a
Right.
window is broken, and you can board it up in order to prevent ongoing damage, the expectation is that you're going to do so, right?
Yeah.
Saving receipts. You mentioned earlier that you have all sorts of tools now, that are apps and things like that when it comes to inventory pre-loss,
Yeah.
but then also, taking pictures, documenting things, not disposing of things until the insurance company, they have the right to inspect.
Hmm.
Not doing things that are going to jeopardize subrogation,
Yes.
because if
Yeah.
something is going on and they can prove that there's another party that's liable, especially when it comes to like appliances and things like that. If you go in there and your plumber or electrician or whoever changes things out and discards things, then you've interrupted the chain of the evidence, and so you weren't able to preserve it in a way where they could have eventually gone after who was ultimately responsible.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, just being as cooperative and just proactive. I'm a huge proponent of, these services for inventory purposes, because most of that is cloud based. You know,
Hmm.
if you think about it, if it's the middle of the night and the fire alarm goes off and you and your family, just with the slippers on your feet and the clothes on your back, have to get out of that house, you may have a special filing cabinet where you keep all your important papers.
Yeah.
Are you going to have access to that post loss? And so if you have it cloud based where you can, I don't know, get on the library computer, log into something, be able
Yeah.
to forward something to someone as a PDF, there's so much value in being able to do so.
All
I
right.
know, again, harping on this Apple thing, if you are an Apple user, then you have an Apple ID. And most people don't realize that when you register a device to use to be able to download content and things like that, that your Apple ID stores the serial number to the devices that your account's being used with.
Yep.
Because that's also a big thing with like kind and quality, is that, okay, we agreed that you had an iPad and it was whatever version and it was whatever size screen, but how much storage did you have? Was it the 256? Was it the 512?
Right.
Things like that, where a picture is not going to be sufficient because you can't eyeball it and tell how much memory something had.
Right.
So there's all sorts of ways. I mean, the information is out there. Back to earlier, I was talking about, loyalty, reward member things, if you shop at certain places. Oftentimes, if you've had the same debit card
Hmm.
for a while, they can do a reverse lookup and find a archived receipt
Yep.
based off of that debit card number. So there are ways, so understand that normally when it comes to settling property claims, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because if something is a relatively recent purchase, then it's reasonable for them
Right.
to ask for evidence of the purchase. If
Right.
something was older, that's fine too. It's reasonable that you've got some of the useful life out of the way and there's going to be some depreciation involved.
Yep.
Um, and so, just like anything else, and again, plugging, Bill Wilson again, as far as reading the policy, we need to understand that more than limits, you have to understand, for example, on the business side, business interruption. That was a big deal and a big source of confusion with the pandemic. So you need to understand what are the triggers, what are the events, what are the perils that actually cause certain limits to kick in. On the personal line side, understanding the loss of use or the additional living expenses, especially when your home has been deemed uninhabitable.
Right.
Is there any sort of elimination period in terms of a time element? Is it actual loss sustained? Is it a certain percentage? These are things that we need to know and understand. Now, here's the reality of it, guys. As an agent, as a broker, your customer is only going to remember a sliver of what you discussed
Yeah.
at the time of the sale. Because losses they're emotional, they're traumatic, and so you're not thinking. It may have been, explained to you, but in that moment, you're not going to remember it. However, at least it will ring familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't let the adjuster be the first time, the first person to have certain conversations with your insureds.
Without a doubt, without a doubt, and just because I have to pay some homage to Bill
Yeah.
here, here is Bill Wilson's blog with the read the full policy blog post that's out there. So yeah, no, all that I completely like. If the claims adjuster is having a coverage conversation with your client. That you haven't had in the past. I mean, look, clients forget what you talk to them about all the time, right? But if this is the first time they're hearing it because you never addressed it with them, you're in danger, one, of losing a client, but two, you're also in danger of getting an E&O claim.
Yes.
So that's something else to remember. To address Tony's comments, my Rainbow Sparkle full-size figurine is actually a knockoff, so I really don't have to worry about that one. Yeah, the $200, I'll forego that one. In fact, I really don't want to see that in print on my homeowner's policy. But yeah. I mean, look, all of that's really good stuff. I think just the idea of like inventorying ahead of time probably makes people cringe. Like they don't feel like they're going to get the value out of doing that. But there's also value there that goes beyond just insurance. There's value in terms of estate planning. There's value in terms of if you go through a move, right? Like, did something make it? Did it get broken, or like did it fall off the truck mid transport or something like that? There's other aspects to doing a home inventory that you're going to derive value from. So I wouldn't. I'd rather advocate for people to do a home inventory. And again, even if it's just that value, the visual one. Lainey said, "Oh, come on, Matt." Yeah, no. Look, I didn't go authentic. I didn't get the signed copy or anything like that. It was, it is what it is. But so anyway, look, I'll give you the last word. Anything else you got that goes with property valuation and whatnot?
I tell you what, again, the value of, we have all sort of things that we do to remind ourselves to take care of what's important.
Yeah.
I know people that, for example, will say that, when the time falls, changes, springs forward or falls back, that's when you check like the batteries in your, smoke detectors or whatnot. Whatever that trigger is, revisiting, understanding, and updating the insurance has got to be on the radar, something we do on a regular basis. Is not
Right.
set it and forget it. We can't just very passively rely on, like I said, cost of living or inflation, endorsements to do the heavy lifting. Because vice versa, you may find that you're paying for something that you don't even need anymore.
Right.
Maybe you have something on a schedule, and you're like, oh, I sold that a long time ago. I didn't realize I was still paying good premium dollars for that. So just giving it, again, making sure that you have an understanding of the coverage you have and what the triggers are in order for it to apply. Making sure that you understand any exclusions and endorsements, especially, because that's another heartbreak, is when you have a loss and you find out that you could have opted into coverage for that. Like backup of sewer is a huge thing, especially down here in Texas. And so the difference between a payout and nothing is an endorsement that would have been really nominal. That sucks. That hurts. So making sure that if you decide not to, because again, this is all about transferring risk. Maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you've got money in the bank for that, and you're like, hey, like you said, the pony, it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm not going to put it on there. That's fine. But make sure that your customers are equipped with the information to make the decisions that they're going to be able to live with.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. Your job is to lead the horse to water, and then you literally have to pull it down and make it drink. Sometimes you got to massage its throat to make sure that it actually swallows too. So, no, I appreciate that. I know. Look, Precious, it's good to have you back. I know you're going through some I like to call them foundational tribulations.
That's what it is. Okay.
When these things happen. I can tell you for a fact that when it hits the fan, you're one of the first people I'm going to call, because you've been through some stuff. So
Oh man. I'm telling you, it's like I keep telling myself that I must be on to something big, because I remember when I had my kids and I went into labor, and they always say, oh, but once you have the pretty little baby, you forget all that pain. And I'm like, I must be in the labor process of birthing out something huge.
Yeah.
It is so humbling, though. I will end with this. When you're on the other end of the desk, when you're on the other end of the experience, it really just invokes a deeper sense of empathy and compassion. And so being the insured, being the, the one filing the claim, all the crazy things we have going on down here in Texas, has really kind of just reinvigorated my desire to be a better agent, right?
Awesome.
And make sure that, I've got these, for lack of better words, these war stories, right? And I can say, oh, beware, don't let this be, your story. So, everything that we do, if we bring it back and we integrate it into what we do, it just makes us better professionals.
Awesome. Look, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
For everyone who's watching, if you're watching live now or the recorded version, every single Wednesday, 3:00, we're here. I might once Precious gets situated, I might have to take a little vacation. I don't know.
I don't know. Right now, Texas is going to be hot. Pardon the pun, for a little bit. I think Tony just mentioned it too. We're officially masked off, so I might have to come out to Jersey and hang out. We'll see. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, you're always welcome up north, Precious. Everyone, please have a very good. If you have time at 5:30, tune in. We got we're actually talking to an underwriter by the name of Noreen, who works for Hartford Steam Boiler, who underwrites green energy risks. So should be a pretty interesting interview. So if you have time at 5:30 Eastern, definitely check that out over on the New Jersey channels. But again, every single Wednesday we're here 3:00 Eastern, talking about slinging insurance, claims, and everything else. So help us with the algorithm, hit a like, and we will see you next week.
See ya.